So, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for today's Awards Excellence Forum. So, my name is Laura Alcott, and I'm an Associate Director at HSE Recruitment, and we're the very, very proud sponsors of today's event. So, today we are going to be assessing some of the biggest risk factors currently facing the health and safety world, taking a look at recent statistics, and of course, learning from some of the best. So, according to the HSE summary statistics for Great Britain 2022, 36.8 million working days were lost due to work-related illness and workplace injury. And the estimated annual costs of work-related injury and new cases of ill health in the year 2019 and 2020 was 18.8 billion. And this is a staggering figure and shows we do still have some work to do. However, although we do have work to do, the entrants to the RoSPA Awards are already making a difference. And they are the best of the best when it comes to health and safety. So we are absolutely delighted to be hearing from some of these fantastic winners today, learning how they're tackling some of the top issues to help reduce these statistics. We're also joined today by Turnstone Law, whose lawyers help organisations, their directors and senior managers in England and Wales that are facing investigation and possible prosecution. Their director, Simon Joyson-Betchell, will be sharing some of the common health and safety issues they're seeing and what they're noticing from a legal point of view. And then finally today, we will hear from RoSPA's Award Standards Manager, Matthew Cryer, who will update you on the 2024 award scheme and any changes that have come into place. There will be plenty of time throughout for you to put your questions to the speakers. So you should see a chat box in the right-hand corner. If you could input your questions go along into the chat, and we'll pick those up during the Q&A portion of today's session. So without any further ado, I am going to hand over to our first speaker today, which is Simon Joyson-Betchell from Turnstone Law. Welcome, Simon.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction and for being invited to speak. So my background, I started life as a doctor and then very quickly decided that wasn't for me and became, after qualifying, and then switched to becoming a lawyer. And as a lawyer, I've been dealing with safety-related issues for, well, 30 years now. And so my focus is defending organizations and the senior people who might be prosecuted for safety breaches. But that also means working with you to get your policies and systems right. I'm very pleased to be partnering with RoSPA now. So I was thinking, what can I discuss as a practical topic that can help you to stay on the right side of the law, or if things go wrong, that the punishment would be less. And when I was working out what I was going to talk about, I was walking in a nearby street at night in the dark. It wasn't very well lit. And there was a guy kneeling at an open manhole in the middle of the street, tugging at a cable. And he was on his own. As I say, he wasn't lit. I thought, that doesn't look very good. And then I could see 300 yards away down the street, there was a group of 4, presumably team members, and they were feeding the cable out to him. And by the time I'd thought about it and arrived at the other 4 chaps, I said, you know, your colleague over there is very exposed. He's not lit and he's on his own. He's very exposed to being hit by a car. And one of the chaps cracked back, oh, don't worry, that's because we don't like him. Well, that was a nice joke. It showed perhaps that he was thinking about it, or perhaps not. But what I'd done effectively, maybe inadvertently, was I'd given them a warning. And those warnings happen. And how you deal with those warnings can become a very important part of what I'm going to just talk about for a few minutes, which is understanding what we call as lawyers the aggravating and mitigating features of the safety breaches or criminal offences that arise from a safety breach, and how you can harness your knowledge and understanding of the aggravating and mitigating features to put yourself in a better position, hopefully protect yourself and your organization. So what do I mean by aggravating and mitigating features? Well, an aggravating feature is something that, in lawyer speak, it's an unhelpful factor for the defendant, the company, or the individual that's being prosecuted. It makes the offence worse if it's aggravated by an aggravating feature. And the opposite is a mitigating feature, which is a helpful factor for the defendant, makes the offence less serious. And these aggravating and mitigating features have an impact, a profound impact on the whole enforcement and prosecution process. They impact the decision to prosecute. So if there's aggravating features that are very bad, you're more likely to be prosecuted, and the reverse with mitigating features. Then they go through and massively influence the sentencing. So if you are convicted, there is a recipe for sentencing that the judge follows. And the features I'm going to discuss, which include, are all the features that push you down to the worst, or should I say up to the most serious offences, serious sentences, whether that's prison or criminal fines. And they also influence the adverse publicity you'll get, because most of these features are the sorts of things that would feature in a newspaper article, a press release by the health and safety executive, sentencing remarks by the judge as to what you've done wrong. So understanding these features becomes a compliance tool and a learning tool and a training tool even, which is effectively what I'm going to discuss today. So let's just kick through some aggravating features to understand what I'm talking about. The first set is to do with warnings and not acting on warnings. So it's failing to act on a previous warning, which could be coming from the authorities. So the local authority, the health and safety executive, the fire authority, they've given you a warning. So that, and you haven't acted on it, that is an aggravating feature, which would mean you're more likely to be prosecuted, the sentence would be worse. Similarly, failing to act on concerns raised by employees or others, busybodies like me walking down the street, failing to act on that. So for example, how would that arise? Well, it might be a scenario where later on that night, the chap might have been knocked over by a car, and maybe the busybody like me would read about it in the press and go to the police or the health and safety executive and say, you know, I warned them, I told them. So passers-by, and of course employees, can do the same. We warned them, we told them. That makes it all more serious. So you need a way to recognize, document, and deal with it, which I've come to. Failure to make appropriate changes after a near miss. Very similar. Near miss you could regard almost as a warning in this sense, or a prior incident. Again, you could regard it as a type of warning. So not acting appropriately, those are aggravating features when you've had a near miss or a prior incident. There's another one which is a bit of a tricky one, allowing a breach to subsist over a long period of time. So your failing is a long-lasting failing. I say it's tricky because quite often those are long-lasting failings that cause a low level of risk, because it might be 3 years you've exposed everyone to this failing, and it took 3 years before an accident happened, and yet that's somehow more serious than a one-day failing, a one-off failing, which was so bad that the accident happened immediately. But there we are. These are the factors that are in the list that the judges use. So allowing the breach to subsist over a long period. A very important one is cost cutting at the expense of safety. So that lies at the heart of quite a lot of what happens. But one person's cost cutting is another person's managing our budget within what our reasonable resources are. It's a tricky one, but it will be used against you if it could be said you're cost cutting at the expense of safety definitely is an aggravating feature. Then there's a couple of things. Deliberate conduct, where you might say, we would never deliberately do something that's going to cause an accident, but you might deliberately fail to fix something or deliberately delay fixing it, perhaps because you can't afford it, or you say you argue you can't afford it. There's another one which gets you up the charts, which is very similar up the charts of sentencing: a flagrant or blatant disregard for the law. So again, it's a similar thing. You say, well, I'm never going to be flagrantly, blatantly disregarding the law. But just imagine an occasion where you're aware that one of your things doesn't comply, or you've got a vulnerability and you're non-compliant with the higher standards or what could be expected reasonably practicably. You then haven't dealt with it, or you put it in a plan to deal with it in 2 years' time when you've got the budget. Effectively, you're disregarding the breach, or arguably, and that could make things more serious. Switching to a different area: vulnerable persons, children, disabled people, people vulnerable in other ways. If they are injured, that's considered to be an aggravating factor. So watch out for things like young people, bring your kid to work schemes, and bringing in juniors, and pregnant women, I suppose, is another one on the list of vulnerable persons. Failing to put in place measures that are regarded as reasonable standards in the industry. So a kind of benchmarking exercise is required, because failing to benchmark and be up to standard is itself an aggravating feature. Then you're also going to be condemned to bigger sentences if you've risked a more serious harm, or if there's a high likelihood of the harm, and if you've exposed more people to risk. So if you've got something that might drop and injure someone, if it's a quiet place where it might drop, but there's unlikely to be someone there, that's not as serious as the aggravating feature that it's suspended over a busy pedestrian walkway where there's a high number of people exposed to the risk. Even if when it falls, it's only likely to land on one person, perhaps, you've still exposed more people to the risk. Other things that are taken into account to aggravate an offence are if you've got a poor safety record. Well, that's a good reason to make sure you have a good safety record. If you've got previous convictions, then there's a set of factors. Concealing deliberately aspects from the authorities, or falsifying records, or obstructing justice. You might say, well, we would never do that. Well, I've experienced that. So I've experienced things where my client might hide the memo that's the damaging memo and not even bring it to my attention. Or in one case, everyone was getting on the backs of the health and safety manager. Why didn't you have a risk assessment for this particular thing that had caused the explosion? And he felt he got it in the neck, so he created a risk assessment after the event and backdated it, and then showed it to me and said, oh, we can give this to the HSE. I sort of didn't ring true to me, because earlier he told me he didn't have one. So I managed to get that deleted and not provided to the HSE. But that would have been falsification of records, quite serious and certainly an aggravating feature. But there are also mitigating factors that you can encourage. Making significant efforts to address a risk, even if they're inadequate on this occasion, that's a mitigating factor that's acknowledged and relevant. Having effective health and safety procedures in place. And you can even reverse the earlier ones. If there wasn't a warning indicating there might be a risk, you can say that's a mitigating factor. And if you take steps voluntarily to remedy the problem, either before or after the incident, that also goes down well as a mitigating factor. Having a good safety record is a mitigating factor. So the work you do now to keep your good safety record, to have your RoSPA awards, that work, certainly the awards as well, will definitely be considered to be a mitigating factor that you will waive at the HSE or the local authority, when they fire authority, they're coming to prosecute. You'll say, look, we know this went wrong, but look how marvelous we are, how hard we try. We've been recognized by RoSPA. Yes, that does help. And having no previous convictions also helps. So with some concluding tips on what you might learn or from this concept of the mitigating and aggravating factors, I think an important thing to learn from it is the importance of having a database of incidents and warnings and near misses. Now, many of you will say, yeah, we've got that. Great. And I see many of my clients have them. But this database can very often be improved. Is it up to date? Hopefully. Does it include underlying and root causes? This is really important. I know you look at and think about, when you investigate an incident, what the underlying and root causes might be. But in my experience of reviewing lots of accident investigation reports, the thoroughness and the search for underlying and root causes is very often tempered by a fear of not blaming someone, which is a justifiable fear, but also a lack of imagination in really working out what's gone wrong here. And this is terribly important, because if we're going to act on the previous warnings, we've got to link them together. So you need to really think about underlying root causes being included in your searchable database. This database must be comprehensive, searchable. It must be regularly monitored and reviewed. So you need to use it as a tool. It's a valuable tool to find out what are those things that have gone wrong for which it could be said we've had a warning that we haven't acted on. I mean, you can use as a prompt every time an incident comes in, you can use that. But actually, I think you need to do more and review it, review your incidents and think about those underlying causes. And every vulnerability that's exposed by monitoring and reviewing your database, if you think you're in breach, you need an action plan to deal with that breach. Otherwise, you're at risk of knowing about a problem and deliberately, flagrantly disregarding the problem and not fixing it. The action plan can have a time course, but preferably not a kick it out to the long grass time course. Having effective safety procedures in place is an important factor to avoid getting into these traps. And always, I think this is the hardest one, but the most obvious one that gets you into trouble. Watch out for cost cutting at the expense of safety. That always gets people into trouble. So I hope those are a few helpful comments from what in many ways is a topic that isn't really talked about very much. It's a legal topic, but I think there's some practical lessons from it.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Simon, for sharing. I found that really, really interesting, and I know learning about those different mitigating and aggravating factors. Fantastic news that the RoSPA Awards is a good mitigating factor. So just another benefit to the RoSPA Awards. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing. Just a quick, the chat box is open, so please keep the comments coming, keep the questions coming, and we will do a full question and answer session at the end of all of the presentations today. So, in July, the Health and Safety Executive published its annual statistics, setting out the number of work-related fatal injuries in the year from April 2022 to March 2023. And this data included deaths reported to the main enforcement bodies for health and safety under RIDDLE, and deaths to members of the public from work-related activities. Fortunately, it was really sad to see there had been a 10% increase in work-related fatalities in Great Britain compared to the previous year. In the year 2022, 2023, 135 workers were killed in work-related incidents in Great Britain. No surprise, consistently with previous years, the construction sector had the highest number of fatalities, with a total of 45 fatal injuries recorded, which really proves, construction still remains that high-risk industry. The report also states that falls from height and being struck by a moving vehicle or object remain the main causes of fatal injuries. Combined, they've accounted for more than half of all fatalities every year since 2001. So some pretty sobering statistics there. In the year until March, 20 injuries recorded were attributable to falls from height, accounting to 30% of all work-related deaths in the period. So yeah, some very sobering statistics for us in there. Introduce our first award winner, who's going to be speaking at today's forum. So we are absolutely delighted that Kirk Robinson has joined us from Mace Group. So for the past 3 years, their East Bank Stratford Waterfront project has achieved a gold in the RoSPA Awards. So absolutely excellent achievement. Within the project, at an early stage, they identified that one of the major hazards would be working from height, whether that be falls or here today to share with us how they managed that hazard. I'd like to hand over to Kirk. Thank you, Kirk.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for listening to me this morning. Thank you, Laura. So can we pop to the next slide, please? We identified early on that falls from height and lifting operations were one of the major contributory factors, as has already been mentioned, with regards to fatalities and serious injuries. So what we looked at was we produced a document called First Principles. Can you pop on 2 slides, please? That one, that's it, fabulous. So just a very brief background of the project itself. It forms part of the East Bank Cultural and Educational District within the Olympic Park at Stratford. There are 5 new buildings. There's the V&A Museum, Sadler's Wells, BBC Concert Studios, there is the London College of Fashion, and a PPRR, which is a retail structure. There's also a steel bridge which was built across 5 railway lines. Next slide, please. This was a photograph I took back in October 2019. This was taken from the top of the ArcelorMittal Tower, just showing you the size of the project itself. The bridge that runs diagonally from right to centre bottom is the pedestrian bridge which runs from Stratford, which is on the right hand side, to the West Ham Stadium, which is in the bottom left of the photograph. So you should be able to just about make out the outlines of the 4 different buildings there. The PPRR actually wraps around the canal side and to the left-hand end of the other 4 structures. Next slide, please. And one more. So what we identified was that people get some potentially really serious injuries from falling from heights or even tripping from heights lower than 600 mil. So what we tended to do, we thought we'd have a look at this and we will try to identify everywhere where there was a change in level on either a slab or a floor or even on the groundworks. There are no basements in these structures, but there were an inordinate amount of piles. There were pile caps, trenches, etc., etc. So what we decided to do was to produce a set of first principles. So can we slide down a couple of slides, please? Right, where we identified changes of level which were under 600 mil, traditionally what we would have done would have been either spray the edge in a different colour, either highlight it in blue or red. and expect people to take notice of it. So what we decided to do was to bolt down some 1.1 metre high mesh panels, similar to K-guard. Where we had designated entrances through these panels, we would either put in a ramp or a step, dependent on whether the route was expected to be trafficked purely by personnel or by materials. Where we had changes in level above 600 mil, potentially on slab edges or cores or openings to stairwells where we didn't have staircases, etc., then we went either full height where we had the slab above poured, or we would go for 1800 mil high and then extend to full height once the slab above had been constructed. Where we had edge protection installed around the slab edges and we knew there were going to be precast panels, or if there were going to be glazing panels installed, we had the protection installed so as the bottom section was removable, which would enable people to install the brackets at slab edge without taking away the full protection, which traditionally might have been done reliant on the use of harnesses to stop people falling over. With regards to lift shaft stairwells, risers and other shaft openings, we had safe gates installed. We went away from the traditional triangular lock system, which everybody's got a key for in their pocket. And we spoke to SafeGate and asked them to fit a different style lock mechanism, which was opened by a kind of a barrel-like key. And also within the risers themselves, we went to Amber Kelly and installed their riser safe system where possible. Obviously, it wasn't possible in certain cases, but working with Amber Kelly and also with our M&E contractors, we tried to get an early design in place where we could decide what was going to be necessary with regards to temporary plates and secondary and tertiary steels within the riser shafts themselves. Can we whip down one slide, please? Thank you. So this is a very, very brief snapshot of the document that we produced. We looked at the building, the project as a whole, and thought there's just too much of it. It'd be like eating an elephant. So we decided what we would do is break it down into each of the different structures. So the one that's shown on the slide here is for Sadler's Wells, I believe. Yep, Sadler's Wells. So what we looked at, we split the building into quarters. So north, northeast, northwest, southeast, southwest. Each of the different risers, whether it be mechanical, electrical, or whether it be lift shaft or smoke vent, etc., was identified with its unique number, and it was made as simple as we possibly could. So it would be NEM, sort of northeast mechanical 01 at floor level, blah blah. Each of the floor plates was identified and marked up in the same way, so as each of the buildings were carried through on a standardized method. Within each of the buildings, there was a spreadsheet, which is shown in the center lower section, which identified whether it was good practice, alert, or a caution. Anything that was caution or alert level needed far more investigation. Best practice was generally, I say generally, accepted that would be the agreed and approved methodology of installation. So when you look again on the right hand side, you can see this, the safe gate doors that we put on. The solid doors were put on anywhere there was a fire escape route to prevent smoke getting into the escape routes wherever possible. Also, the riser doors were a mesh riser, which was mesh door that was put on there, so we could be sure that there was nobody inside the riser when the door was shut, which was another sort of safety hazard that we identified. Next slide, please. The top left photograph, I tried to insist that we got these sockets cast in to all of the floor slabs and where we had upstand beams. It meant a little bit of a redesign with regards to some of the rebar that was in there. But what it did mean was that we didn't have people working on slab edges. They weren't drilling into concrete for the traditional method. We weren't hitting rebar. We didn't have to worry about white finger. We didn't have to worry about spalling concrete, etc., etc. And the panels and the tubes that fitted into these sockets have got a captive détente pin, so you couldn't just lift them out. You had to physically push the pin to release the clip into these sockets. It worked in probably 80% of the situations where we wanted it. Other than that, we had to go back to the traditional method of drilling and bolting panels in. Excuse me. We also looked at cast-in inserts where we knew we were going to have services penetrating through the slabs. Again, traditionally what we would have done is gone back to working at height, which meant you could have fallen from a tower or a set of steps or podium steps, whatever, potentially a MEWP. But what we found was, or what we thought was, if we cast these sleeves in, you could push the pipework through that, you could make your connection underneath it, which reduces, it doesn't eliminate, but it reduces the amount of time people were spending working at height. Bottom left, we tried to install this scissor safe system where you cast in the little insert. It's quite difficult to see, but in the top right of that left-hand bottom corner photograph is a picture of the little white insert that's cast into the slab, which means you only have to have 2 or 3 of the scissors themselves, which once they have a carabiner installed in place, they are impossible to remove. So we looked at the use of those. Traditionally, we were always finding people were wrapping steel ropes around columns, and then you got trailing cables and you got lanyards and who knows what all else in that sort of situation. So we went down that route with regards to looking at protection and the use of harnesses. And the bottom right-hand photograph, or the centre bottom photograph, is just a shot of the tower cranes we had there. There were actually more than that. There's 5 shown. We actually had 7 plus several mobile cranes. We found that people were arriving on site to carry out maintenance work or to carry out checks and safety inspections, etc., on the cranes, and all sorts of other plant as well, whereby they would just roll up on site at sort of 7 in the morning expecting to be allowed in on site with no let or hindrance, which caused all kinds of grief when you're thinking about exclusion zones underneath them, when you're thinking about trafficked areas, green routes. So we ended up writing a series of documents, which was notification of intention to carry out maintenance or to carry out scheduled works. And we insisted that the fitters and everybody sent us these notifications in and gave us plenty of notice, which could then be passed on at DABs in the morning and in the coordination meetings on the previous afternoon. On the top right-hand corner, we also looked at accessing vehicles and trailers. Traditionally, trailers would be accessed by one of the drivers climbing up the back wheel and using it as a ladder. There may have been some kind of edge protection at some stage or other, but we decided we were going to sort of meet this head on, and we insisted that the contractors used, I believe they were called angel wings, but they're a loading, they're an access platform. They're very lightweight aluminium. They've got double edge protection on the one side of them, access steps at the back, and then there is also a series of tail end gates that can be put on the trailers of the wagons when they're brought in. So that worked very well as well. Next slide, please. Next one. So prevention and falling materials. What we have as a company, everything on the site when you're above, it says 2 meters, but what we've said is once you're off the floor, that's it. Everything needs to be tethered. It's a royal pain. It really is. That includes safety helmets. We went down the route of a tether onto a onto a high vi, but we found that wasn't necessarily practicable, so we insisted on chin straps with 4-point attachments. All tools had to be tethered, including telephones, including radios. We had all kinds of argument from the cladding guys and girls saying that we can't clad our brackets, there are too many bits. And we said, well, prefabricate them. You know, if something's not loose, you can't drop it. GKR developed the Eliminate fitting, which can be tethered just by the use of a figure-8 washer, which is such a simple solution. It's just beyond belief. Nobody's thought of it before. And the final thing I'm going to talk about today is, as part of my role, I sit on the Tower Crane Interest Group. I sit on the Crane Interest Group, and one of my main passions is about plant and lifting equipment in general. So we sit on the steering committee, and ourselves, and there are 2 other contractors which sit within the Construction Plant Hire Association, and we try to put across the point of view from the contractor and from an end user, and this is from the suppliers of the lifting equipment, because a lot of the time the legislation and the new equipment that they bring out never gets sent to us. It's always talked about within the industry, but it never ever gets seen out in the light of day. So following a very close call we had down at Stratford, last slide please. Oh, next slide, that's it. Following a very close call, there was a shackle that got dropped. It was actually kicked through one of the voids on the tower crane. It fell a distance of 42 meters. The shackle weighed something like 2.5 kilos. So by the time that hit the deck, the impact energy of that was a fair amount. It would have stung, but not for very long if it had hit anybody. But what we found was that the manufacturer of the crane, this is a Terex machine, they have in the back jib on the machine deck on these machines, they have all these voids which are installed at the factory, which allow cables to be passed through. Now, there is nothing to stop any of the fitters kicking anything down through any of these voids when they're carrying out any works on the cranes. So we took this back to the Tower Crane Interest Group. They passed it back to Terex and the other crane manufacturers. And Terex were extremely good. They were very proactive. They sent out all kinds of technical alerts to their different owners. And there are now covers being installed, or that have been installed, to most of the back jibs on the cranes. So hopefully we can make sure that nothing gets kicked through these voids and nothing falls, whether that be a tool or whether it be a nut, bolt, washer, whatever. We don't want anything dropping down it. So wrapping everything up, basically we took the premise that if there isn't a hole or if there isn't an open edge, you can't fall down it, you can't fall off of it. If everything is tethered, you can't drop it. And as long as we make sure that everything is covered as far as is reasonably practicable, then we should be okay. Where we wrote these documents, the first principles documents, we did say that the plant and equipment and areas that were covered was a non-exhaustive list, because whatever you put in there, if you put in 110 different items, different areas and different places, there will be 111, and the one you miss is the one that people are going to hang you for. So following on from what Simon said, just be a little careful as to what we put on the paperwork, which is where we think we were. The documents that we sent through to RoSPA as part of our submission are far, far longer than this. It would have taken absolutely ages to run through them. But I hope that's given you a very brief a very brief view of what we did and where we sit currently as a company. Other than that, thank you for listening, and that's me done.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Kurt. This is one of the reasons I love these excellence forums. Hearing all the innovative stuff that you guys have done is just so fascinating to me, and I think it really gives us a sense of purpose, doesn't it? I know that health and safety, sometimes the external perception can be just about the fines and the things that went wrong, and we all know it's much more than that. So thank you so much, Kurt, for sharing that. So I'm absolutely delighted to be introducing our next speakers for today. So Alison and Claire from Leeds Teaching Hospital NHS Trust. So some stats here for you before we jump into their presentation. So the 2022 statistics from the Health and Safety Executive show us that 914,000 workers were suffering from work-related stress, depression, or anxiety in 2021 to 2022. Big numbers there. So, and the effects of the coronavirus pandemic were found to be a major factor in these numbers. So within their 2023 awards submission, Leeds Teaching Hospital NHS Trust was cited as having an absolutely outstanding approach to mental health first aid. So we're absolutely delighted they're able to share with you all today the stuff that they've been doing. Alison has a passion for reducing stigma around mental health. She's worked for the Leeds Teaching Hospital NHS Trust for 20 years and is currently their mental health project lead. Joining us alongside Alison is Claire, who's worked for the NHS within wellbeing and people development for years. And in her role as health and wellbeing practitioner, she delivers on the wellbeing strategy for over 23,000 staff members. So, Alison and Claire.
Thank you, Laura. I'm going to try and navigate this as best I possibly can because I can't see the slides. So with Alison's help, I will do my best. So yeah, thank you for having us. As Laura kind of introduced us, we are Alison and Claire, and we work for Leeds Teaching Hospitals, and we lead on staff wellbeing. So before we kind of talk about what it is that we did, I'm just going to kind of set the scene a little bit for you. So we can have the next slide, please. So as Laura mentioned, Leeds Teaching Hospitals is 23,000 staff strong. We have an ambition to be the best place to work in Leeds, and we always try and put well-being of our staff kind of at the forefront of everything that we do. We know if we have happy staff, we have happy patients. With such a large organisation, there's never a one-size-fits-all support package. So we've got a very expanding, diverse workforce, so nothing really just works for everybody. As Laura mentioned, the pandemic really did highlight the additional need for mental health support within the trust. We managed to receive quite a large grant from our charity that we work with, so Leeds Hospital Charity, and they will be able to support us with implementing a few things. And one of the things we're going to talk about today is the mental health programme. And now it's important to note at this point, when we received the grant, before we started anything, our CRR04 risk was currently sitting with the Workforce Committee, which is kind of as high as it can sit until it goes to the board, really. So in quite a bit of a pickle, I think it's fair to say we were. So I'm going to hand over to Alison to talk through what it is that we did.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So as part of the health and wellbeing strategy for the trust, there's an aim to implement mental health first aiders across all departments. And mental health first aiders are there to listen, have the skills to hold an emotive conversation, check for risks, and then signpost the most appropriate support. So, you know, that first point of contact for people. So Claire and myself trained as mental health first aid instructors in order to deliver monthly 2-day courses to our workforce. Each course you can have 16 people on, and our ambition was to train 600 staff members within 2 years. As a trust, we have 30 what we call CSUs, but come under the heading of departments, which cover around 600 teams. So we went to all the departments to ask them to start thinking about who may be best placed within the role. That was really important to us, that it was somebody who wanted to be a mental health first aider in the role so that they could give the best support to somebody else. Whereas if somebody was in the role who didn't want to be a mental health first aider, we felt it could actually have a bit more of a negative impact. In addition to this, we set up monthly peer groups for our trained mental health first aiders, so they felt supported, along with also getting things like fortnightly newsletters and 2 CPD events every year. So we wanted them to know that they may be doing this role, but they had that support mechanism in place. Next slide, please. And the next again, please. So this slide just is there to just show you how many mental health first aiders we have and how they sort of are shared across. So as of the 1st of August 2023, we had 776 mental health first aiders within the trust, and yet they are quite well distributed across the departments. So we can have a look at that and we can sort of see areas maybe where they may need a few more, and we can go and work with those teams then to try and help them find people who might be suitable. And it shows here, you know, the advantage of having a peer-led local support and how it really works. You know, those people are out there in teams and departments, so easy to access from our staff. Next slide, please. So each month, we ask our mental health first aiders to complete a form to show how many contacts they've had with staff. And between June 2021 and July 2023, there's been a total of 6,950 contacts. In July, it was 334. So again, that shows a big impact on how those mental health first aiders are being used. This is demonstrating that conversations are happening and the mental health first aiders bring value to our workforce to support mental well-being. Next slide, please, and over to you, Claire.
Thanks, Alison. So this slide demonstrates the themes. So again, we try not to collect any personal data, but we do need kind of that generic data to see if there's any gaps that the trust can kind of support with. So these have been what the conversations have been about. And then we can do something about it. So for example, it was becoming quite apparent, lots of people were seeking support around financial well-being, particularly this time last year. So we managed to put something in place. We looked at we have a hardship fund already, but we could enhance that hardship fund. And also we work with the community interest company Money Buddies, so they can provide additional support. So this is why we kind of collect some of this data, because it's really important that we can help fill some of the gaps that are there. Next slide, please. As Alison mentioned earlier, it's the key role of a mental health first aider to signpost. So, you know, our mental health first aiders need to know what's going on around them. They need to know what's going on within the trust. So this slide demonstrates how they have been signposting effectively and kind of what services have they been signposted to. So as Alison mentioned earlier, we offer kind of CPD days and newsletters. So our mental health first aiders are very, very much up to date of what is going on within the area and what is going on with the community and our system that we work with across Leeds and across West Yorkshire. Next slide, please. So although the majority of our mental health first aiders are female, we're really pleased that we have exceeded our target for males. And we know that males are a hard to engage group sometimes when it comes to mental health. So we were really, really pleased to kind of hit those targets. We didn't set any targets for our medical staff because we know again that they are a really hard to engage group. However, we have got some medics and we have got some surgeons and some dentists that have become mental health first aiders. So that will be our next step going forward. It'll be trying to engage with some of those groups and encourage them to sign up. And one of the things we are doing is we're popping it on the job descriptions for consultants. So we're saying we strongly recommend as a trust that you look at the mental health first aid course once you are appointed within the organisation. And we work on commissioned as well by HSE to deliver 2 cohorts just for junior doctors across the country. So that was really great. It was really lovely to see just having some of those conversations with some of those groups of people and some of the things that they experience. So that was lovely. So we're kind of picking that up and moving forwards with that now. And over to Alison.
Next slide, please. So the next steps, Claire's just mentioned there about engaging our medics, and then we're looking as well other things that might impact on people's mental health. So we've got working carers, so we're doing a lot of work around supporting our staff who are working carers. looking at a BME health and wellbeing plan. And we're also doing a lot of work at the moment around embedding a suicide postvention service within our organisation. So this project supported the reduction of the CRR04 risk to be downgraded, and it's now sitting with our Health and Wellbeing Committee, who gets everything fed into them. We look at actions that we can put in place to support different things. It's also supported our sickness, S10, which is mental health related sickness, and it's supported with that helping to reduce that. We feel we still have a journey to continue, but couldn't be prouder of this robust peer-led support package that holds an army of nearly 1,000 people. And that's because we have our mental health first aiders, but we also have over 300 staff who are mental health first aid champions as well, who help to ensure staff are aware of what support there is. It's, we're trying to reduce the stigma around mental health, and we're encouraging people to speak out so they can access that support that they need. Next slide, please.
So that is it from us. We hope that you have felt inspired and motivated to kind of think about your organisation and your staff wellbeing a little bit differently. It's something a little bit differently to probably what you're used to hearing about. And if any organisation does want to set up their own programme, Alison and I would be more than happy to have a conversation and just talk you through some of the step-by-step that we put in place and see if we can help in any way. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claire and Alison. Really, really love that presentation. Mental health is such an important topic. Always has been, but absolutely has taken on a lot of importance over the last few years after the pandemic, and very timely as well with World Mental Health Day last week. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. Please do keep your comments and your questions coming in the chat box. We will be doing, as I said, a Q&A session after the presentations. But for now, I'm absolutely delighted to introduce our next speaker today. So Danny Eason, who is the Group Health and Safety Assurance Project Lead at Orbit Group. So Orbit Group have been entering the RoSPA Awards for a number of years now. And in 2023, they achieved Highly Commended in Team of the Year. So an amazing achievement there. So Danny today is going to be speaking to us about the way that they work to deliver health and safety effectively, and hopefully give you some inspiration so that you and your team can work more collaboratively and more successfully. So Danny, over to you.
Thanks, Laura. So my name's Danny. I work for Orbit as an assurance project lead. And within the Orbit group, we just sort of give a bit of an introduction, really. We are a housing association with 45,000 stock and over 100,000 customers, and our geography sort of spans around the Midlands area of England over to the east and south of England. I've been with Orbit for since August 2015, I believe. So I have seen Orbit go on a journey, and it's still on that journey, I would say, from the way we view health and safety originally to how we view health and safety now. I think I just mirror sort of what Alison had previously mentioned, that it is a journey that you will see with regards to health and safety. It's not always going to be the fact that you will reach the end. You'll always be continuously improving. And I guess that's probably where we start, really. In terms of 2015, we started by looking at where the culture was with regards to health and safety in Orbit. If you were to ask employees who was responsible for health and safety, their replies would either be the manager or the health and safety team. And that really helps to gauge the culture of where we want to try and improve with regards to health and safety in the business. So next slide, please. So we model our health and safety on the Plan, Do, Check, Act model, and it helps to sort of look at where your work streams are in terms of what you're responsible for, where your operations run. So if we just have a look at the plan section of work stream, and we split this into our health and safety guidance and governance. So this would showcase the different ways in which we try to plan our health and safety within the business. Like every organisation, our policy procedures will sit within this segment, but we have a number of things that also we help to achieve this plan section of the model, whether that be the systems we have in place to support our frontline operational teams, as well as what our external support we have in terms of being able to ensure that we have the right governance in place. So for us, our health and safety team model works as a second line of assurance. So we provide support to our frontline operational teams. So we have to put in the systems and the frameworks in order for operational teams to stay compliant, and then we can monitor those to make sure that we are doing all our statutory duties, as well as actually trying to achieve best practice. Just going through a couple of those things. Some of the systems we've got in place, we use a IT system called Evotix. I don't know whether other people on this call might use that, but we certainly have been implementing that system since 2018, really to showcase and trying to make health and safety a lot easier and a lot more user-friendly for people to interact with. So we have an app as part of that system, which really fits our geography and also the way that people work. You know, not everyone is at a desk because we are a housing association. Most of our work, if not all of our work, happens in customers' homes and on the estates that we own. So that's where the heart of where a lot of our health and safety issues lie. So we have to make sure that the ability for people to report any concerns can be done through where they are. So certainly having an app functionality makes our business a lot more mobile, and we can capture things as they happen. We also have personal safety and driver management systems that we use in order to improve our compliance. And as mentioned, we are members of both RoSPA and IOSH because we want to make sure that we've got that external accreditation, but also we can go by their advice and guidance to better our business. We have also implemented since the start, actually been improved really, is our health and safety committees. We now have a group committee in the business which focus on all different realms of where we operate, whether that be in our shelter schemes, where we be on our construction sites, in our offices. We're trying to achieve the same common goal of actually making sure that our health and safety is paramount and priority, just as important as everything we do within the business. Next slide, please. But the real key thing is to make sure that our staff, and in terms of improving culture, is making sure that the staff have the competence in place to make sure that health and safety is as important as it needs to be with everything they do with their job role. So we have a different way in which we deliver training within the business, whether that be online, whether that be face-to-face, whether that be through e-learning. That's all been adapted to make sure that the learning is tailored to that individual job role. So really from the start of where we saw in 2015, we wanted to make sure that the training was relevant to the people that they actually needed to complete. So that started with our training matrix. So we job profiled each employee based on a category of risk, and then made sure that the learning they need to carry out was actually relevant to them. If I was to go and add some statistics to this, certainly at the start, sort of around 2015, our training compliance was around 15%. So it was really, really low in terms of people actually completing the training on time. But through this journey that we've seen of trying to improve culture and showing that health and safety is not just the manager's responsibility of the health and safety team, but everyone in the business, our training compliance now sits at around 98.5% of people completing training on time. So a huge shift in people completing their training, not because they have to, but because they want to. Because they see the relevance of that they're keeping themselves safe, not only to protect them in work, but also protects them outside of work as well. Next slide, please. And then fundamental in terms of making sure that we are checking to see whether our plans and procedures are working. Are people following the training that's been put in place? We have a number of ways in which we try and measure performance within the business, whether that be proactive or reactive measures. So there are just a list of just some of the ways in which we try to capture our health and safety performance. So we do obtain an assurance risk register, which looks at the current risks that we have in the business, and then monitoring these through ongoing measures and KPIs to essentially assign to people responsibility to make sure that those risks are being mitigated and developing that continuous improvement. Next slide, please. And then our act part, which then the recommendations and the changes that we are implementing to gain that continuous improvement within the business. So whether that be internally through us within the health and safety team, but also liaising with outside authorities as well, whether that be the fire service, local authorities, Public Health England. We will liaise with those, and we will welcome their advice and support to be able to make sure that our properties and our businesses are as safe as it can be. We have also gone for 2 QSAs with RoSPA. So we did one in 2019, and then we did one again in 2022. And we have seen a significant improvement in our awards from QSA, from going from a level 2 to a level 4 in just that short period of time. Next slide, please. So moving on to our actual submission that we have applied for through RoSPA. So really talking about the journey that we've been on. We first applied for a RoSPA awards back in 2018, where we were awarded a silver award. So there obviously was areas of improvement, but we were certainly happy with that to begin with. But as we've now got to 2023, we've been achieving a RoSPA Gold every year since. But that doesn't mean that we've just simply submitted the same work. For RoSPA, in order to attain the RoSPA Gold, there has to be continuous improvement. What else have you done? What's something different in order to sustain that RoSPA Gold? So with our submission, and with any of them that we've done for the previous years, is implementing our work streams that we've highlighted and actually using the plan, do, check model within our submission. So for us, we were looking at what we do as a business, who we are, and then looking at what we do within our own specific team. So highlighting our second line of assurance and the different work streams that we operate in to make sure that our frontline teams are operating as they need to. So people, we'd be focusing on people safety. Property, we'll be looking at our estates. Construction would look at our build side of the business, and then our management systems would be our compliance with the stuff that we have in place. As mentioned, we also have the risk register, but we also need to make sure that as a business, as a team, we are having continuous improvement as well. It's not just about our frontline teams, but actually what can we do as a second line of assurance. So we have a gap analysis which looks at our own internal procedures and looks to bridge the gaps in terms of what improvements can we do, what improvements can be made to make sure that we are at the forefront with health and safety. And then looking at our developing our culture, that was within our submission. Where as mentioned, we were looking sort of at the 2015, if you ask the people in the business where they viewed or who was responsible for health and safety, they would have either said the manager or health and safety team. We submitted the same questionnaire again, believe we were in 2020, to ask the same questions, and we found that the dependency shift had looked to be more interdependent, where as a business, people know that they are responsible and they want to be involved in health and safety. They see the importance of it. This has actually also coincided with the introduction of more improved training. So we now have become an accredited provider of IOSH training within in-house. So that would be matched to their risk profile of each job role, whether they be carrying out working safely or actually managing safely risk, which covers risk assessment trainings more specifically to our managers in the business, so we can improve their competence. We know that, so they're not just aware that risk assessment is something they have to do, but they see the importance of it. Along with that, we also try to involve as much of our workforce as possible within things that we might check. So if we're going out and doing job inspections or site inspections, we will welcome members of the business to come and carry out those inspections with us. We know that sometimes people can work in a silo. We know that people sometimes aren't aware of actually what other people do within their own job roles. So we often encourage people to become part of that inspection so they can understand what each of us do. Our system implementation was also included as part of our submission because we wanted to showcase the improvements our systems have had on the compliance and also the culture within Orbit. So one of the things I showcased was the use of Evotics. This was to improve the usability of people being able to access health and safety systems when out and about. This is coincided with a number of campaigns we tried to do, particularly around things like near-miss reporting. Back in 2015, the total number of near misses reported for the year for 2015-16, I think, was around about 18. So we knew that there was a case of underreporting, but through a number of things such as system implementation and improvements in campaigns and making people aware of the importance of near miss reporting, we now sit just under 1,000 near misses reported each year within the business. And to compare that to the number of riddles we've had, we have only reported one riddle for last year, and I think that's pretty substantial considering we are a construction business as well. If you just want to go on to the next slide, please. And that then highlights us to then look to where we are comparing ourselves within the sector. So we are part of a benchmarking group where we sit with other housing associations and we look at health and safety performance. I don't know about sort of other sectors, but where we sort of operate in housing, but particularly in health and safety, you don't really call them competitors. You know, health and safety is something that's shared between all, it's shared across sector. So we are often welcome what other people are doing and what else are they doing to keep people safe. And so we've got shared learning across businesses because we all have that one common goal. No one wants to come to work to be injured. So whatever the housing association is doing to keep themselves safe, we want to know about it. We want to make sure that we can mirror that as well. Tying in with the plan, do, check, act model, we also, part of our submission, showcased a case study. This was centered around violence and aggression. So certainly out of the pandemic, we had noticed an increase or being notified of violence and aggression issues in the business. And we weren't quite sure whether this was really a true reflection of what was actually happening. So we carried out a toolbox talk to try and address some of these issues with the particular front-facing staff. And the response was a little bit maybe with the case of underreporting, a little bit of customer behaviour, but some of our teams were very open and honest and just thought that was just part of their job role, which highlights that more could be done. So we had a look at our existing policy procedures that were in place, particularly around violence and aggression, our reporting structure, sort of what existing controls do we have in place, whether that be account markers that we attach to a customer's profile, that make sure that people are aware of what potentially the risk be. So we reviewed these and did a campaign to make sure that people were reporting them where there was concern. We also, as part of this, do host an annual health and safety awards internally within Orbit, which showcases sort of the work that had been done across teams. But we also invite representatives from outside the sector. And one of these we actually invited was a violence and aggression specialist to come and do a talk about some of the things that people can be aware of and some of the mitigating control measures that could be implemented. And that went down really well. It was really welcomed by all of the people who attended the event. And we are continuing to work with that partner to now roll that out through the rest of the business. So whilst this case study has been implemented, this is still ongoing. And as I said, this is still a journey and we know that there's more work that can be done. And then finally, just looking at our external accreditation. So as I've mentioned, this is a journey, this is a continuous improvement, and these just highlight some of the things that the journey we've been on, certainly from RoSPA's perspective, when we've reached out to them and they come in and they audit us on our performance. So certainly from 2018, whilst it was still a silver, we were really happy with that. We obviously want to strive to achieve more. And so 2019 to 23 so far, we've achieved gold, as well as our QSA level 2 to level 4, and then highly commended in both the sector in 2022 to then highly commended 2023. But again, there's still more room for improvement, and we will continue to go on this journey. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Danny. Really, really informative. I love the detail included in that, and you know, we can really clearly see your passion for the subject, which is excellent. So thank you so much for sharing. We've got time for just a little bit of Q&A, so I'm just going to do a couple of the questions that have come through before handing over to our final speaker. So if I can ask the panelists just to pop the cameras back on so we can see your lovely faces. First question was for Claire and Alison. So for Claire and Alison, what was the response like and how open were the staff when you started conducting those interactions as mental health first aiders?
So if I kick off, and then Alison, you can build on it if that's okay. So I think we really got our comms and marketing right. So the trust knew it was coming. They knew that this was going to be part of our mental health support offer. One of the reasons why we wanted to get it across all the departments was really to embed that culture. So we could have just gone, right, everyone in HR, do your mental health first aid qualification, but we chose not to do that. We chose that peer-to-peer support. So it's almost kind of become the normal route now. So as terms of the culture, it was a really easy sell. It was really easy to navigate. I've just seen Alison's, oh, she's back. But I think, Alison, do you want to build a little bit more about kind of on an individual level and how maybe staff felt kind of coming towards with some of the conversations you've had maybe?
So, yeah, I mean, first of all, getting people sort of wanting to do the training has been very, very easy. We actually are fully booked up now until April 2024, with lots of people still contacting us, a lot around word of mouth. I've had emails sort of saying, oh, a colleague went on it, she told us so much about it, we're so keen. So word of mouth's been a really big thing of getting people onto the training. And then once they are mental health first aiders, I think they're having such a positive impact on people that it's doing a positive impact on their health and well-being as well. But because we've got the right things in place, if they do have a conversation with somebody that might have a bit of an impact on how they're feeling, they know who they can come and talk to themselves. And we use the mental health first aiders to support each other, as well as having other sort of supervisions in place for them as well.
Fantastic. Thank you both for that answer. I completely agree. I think that openness is so important, isn't it, in terms of mental health. Simon, there was a query or a comment for you around sort of this mitigating factors area. So there is a time limitation for a claim for a work-related ill health or injury, which we believe is about 3 years. So if someone claims outside of that, or attempts to claim outside of that time period, or towards the end of that time period, does that count as a mitigating factor, or how would that be seen?
I'm glad this question came up, and maybe it's my fault. I expect it is my fault that I didn't make clear. What I'm describing is criminal enforcement, health and safety executive, fire authority, police, in the case of a fatality, and local authority. So the criminal enforcement regime doesn't have any limitation period. It doesn't. They could prosecute you many years afterwards. That's very unlikely to happen. I mean, a 2 or 3 year delay is quite common. 5, 6, 7, 8 year delays do happen, but this is the criminal side. The 3 year limitation period is for personal injury claims for compensation. That's a different regime. So I hope to make that clear. But nonetheless, my points are evergreen points for the behaviors to avoid that are the aggravating features, are the evergreen points for not just reducing the likelihood of prosecution or the severity of prosecution, severity of punishment, but also, of course, reducing the likelihood of harm and incidents and injuries. Yeah,
perfect. Thank you. That was really helpful for sort of clearing that up. Danny, I don't know if you could tell us a little bit about how the Health and Safety Awards, how did that kind of affect your internal motivation for staff?
Yeah, so is that our own internal Health and Safety Awards, did you say, sorry?
Yes, so that, and obviously the RoSPA, you know, all of this sort of thing, how does that kind of help with perception and motivation?
Yeah, so certainly from a health and safety, from our team perspective, certainly getting the accreditation from RoSPA is a real motivating factor for us as a team, because what RoSPA will do as part of their accreditation is they'll tell you sort of where your score is, but actually look at where you can improve. And that's a real key factor in terms of where we know we need to make changes. From an internal perspective, when we've hosted our own awards in conjunction with RoSPA, It helps to showcase the work that has been done within Orbit. Sometimes health and safety can be dry, let's be fair, but actually making that a celebration, making that an award show for people to actually highlight what they've done has been done right, rather than just constantly tell them, oh, you've done something wrong, this is what you need to do. Actually showcasing the real good work, the best practices that have been highlighted has been such a motivating factor for people in the business. If we look at, and it spills over in terms of the things we've seen across the business as well. So we've got people who want to be volunteering for committee. We've had to go through sort of a selection process to get the committee members to make sure that they are the right fit, rather than just going to them saying, can you please be a committee member? They're coming to us instead. We've also, through the use of making health and safety a lot easier for us in the business, for people to report any sort of concerns around near misses, auditing. We've got other members of other teams wanting to use that system as well for non-health and safety concerns. So to me, these are all really positive ways in which health and safety is having an impact on the business. And that's sort of said, for us, it's a journey, and we know that we've got changes, improvements to be made, but we are going in the right direction.
Fantastic. I don't know what you mean by dry. Health and safety is not dry at all, but no, I really appreciate that. I think it's that definitely gave us some sort of insight into the benefits of this, you know, internally, and how they can be perceived. One final question for sort of the award winners on the panel. One tip for people that are entering the awards or planning to enter the awards. What is your sort of one golden tip? An open.
I don't mind going first.
Yeah, go for it.
For me, it would be I try and do something different. Try and showcase why you're different to the other people that are applying for through the RoSPA submission. As always, it's done wonders for us. But then it's a case of we have to showcase something different each year. But that keeps it exciting. You know, each year we come up with different ways in which we can try and make health and safety improve within the business, and then we can showcase that to RoSPA.
For me, I would just put in there that it does take a long time to make sure you collate the right evidence, and tell the truth. There's no point telling a crock of poo about stuff which nobody's going to believe. You know, it's a warts and all thing. And as was said earlier about the mental health stuff, I mean, I could have used that as a submission, but we wanted to make sure that all the good stuff we were trying to do at Stratford and stopping people getting injured from falling from height, or from being struck by something falling from a height, was showcased. But as I say, for me, it's a case of take your time, do it properly, read it, reread it, go away from it, then read it again, and then submit.
Perfect. Attention to detail. Yeah. Claire, Alison, any top?
I think for me it would be to tell the story and be really, really clear with what you actually did and what you actually achieved. Sometimes you can get lost in the detail a little bit. So start, a middle, and an end, and really kind of showcase the end.
Yeah, perfect. Alison, anything to add? No, perfect. Thank you all. Really, really good Q&A there. And hopefully you won't mind me saying, if there are any additional questions, people can reach out on LinkedIn or anything like that, if that's all right with everybody. So we are going to move on now to our final presentation of the day. So I'm actually Awards Standards Manager for RoSPA. So as you're aware, the 2024 RoSPA Awards are now open. So Matt is here to provide you with some really key insights on how you can make sure that your entry is submission ready. You know, so where do people go wrong? How do you avoid clarification delays, that sort of thing. So yeah, Matt, over to you.
Thanks very much, Laura, and thank you to all of those of you who've already spoken this morning. I'm delighted to say that lots of things I'm going to say kind of backs up some of those comments that you've just really helpfully made in terms of your personal reflections on the RoSPA Awards. So as Laura said, I'm the standards manager here at RoSPA, and I'm going to be talking to you a bit about making things submission ready, and in particular thinking about some of the common maybe faults and pitfalls that might hold you back in the entry process as well. Next slide, please, Kate. So to give you an overview really of where we are at the moment, the registration period for the 2024 awards is now open. We've got early discounts in place till the end of October as a practical incentive to get involved nice and early. Once you've made that initial registration, which is literally just a registration, you then will be given the information for the online login system, and you can start work on your submission then, or your submissions if you're entering different categories. For 2024 awards, you'll have until the 24th of January to complete your entry and bring it together. And then we move into the results phase, which then kind of starts towards the end of March. For those of you who kind of follow a slightly different timeline within your work patterns, we do also offer a second phase of entry slightly later on in the year, which is for our non-competitive categories only. But if that's something that interests you for the Achievement Award, for example, and not the competitive categories, that is also an option that you can take on. So next, please. So to give you some kind of advice then in terms of how to pull together a good entry, getting a submission ready, we've got lots of resources available to you now from across RoSPA that have been helpfully put together by the awards team and our communications team. Some ones to look out for this year. We've got a really helpful checklist, which is available on the main awards website under our kind of dates section. We've also got a really helpful new guide this year, the comprehensive guide on putting together RoSPA Health and Safety Award. This is kind of aimed at prospective entrants, but it's going to form the basis of what we're going to talk through today because there's such helpful information in there to use as a reference point. And then finally, last but not least, we've got the various different guidance notes that you're given within your award category in the online entry system. And they are the much kind of finer detail of, you know, how to approach each question section by section as you come across it. But next one, so please, Kate, we're going to focus largely on the advice today that's given within this guide to approaching an entry for the RoSPA Awards. So next one. So first of all, I think my key advice would be to make sure you start early. I think like some of our panelists have alluded to today, it takes a while to tell your story and to pull things together. So we want you to kind of, you know, really avoid any last minute rushes that will possibly lead to information being inadvertently left out, or not giving you the opportunity to canvass your wider team, for example, or do those last minute quality checks. So, you know, there's time in the team effort that it takes to pull things together. I think to see one of the questions that I saw pop up on the side chat there, you know, it takes maybe kind of around a week at least to put an award submission together in terms of total time, possibly longer depending on how many people you have involved. So you can then, you know, spread those days over the course of a couple of months rather than having to do them all in one go. And it helps with your planning as well. It also helps you really evaluate and weigh up which are the right examples to use. So we will have a limit of words and a limit of evidence on each section, but taking that bit of extra time helps you really kind of think through and do those final checks. Next one, please. So thinking about the scope of your entry is something you'll first be asked when you make a registration as to whether your entry is for the whole organisation or whether it's for a particular site or a particular division. It's really important that you then follow that scope through the whole entry process once you've specified it at the start. That means particularly in terms of the narrative and the evidence you provide. So if you are from a wider group that has top level procedures that you follow at a site level, it's really important that you're evidencing how your kind of defined location is following those procedures and policies. So we would be looking for examples of active use, or what we call worked evidence, showing those policies being followed and the planning being followed at the local level rather than the whole organisation level. I think it's worth saying, you know, as well, in terms of that scope, particularly if you're looking at something that is either an individual site or you're an organisation that's got lots of individual sites that you want to use the awards to help with your benchmarking, they are a great tool to really help kind of promote and motivate safety culture, a little bit like Danny was talking about earlier in terms of how it's been used within Orbit. Next one, please. Following the guidance notes, so those guidance notes I showed on screen at the start, you'll get three different sets of guidance notes within each of the categories you apply for. So guide A will be the guide that talks you through each of the questions what is involved section by section, and it helps you understand the scope of the way we expect you to answer a question as well. Make sure you read those through for each category so you understand where you need to present certain information and certain topics, and to avoid any overlaps between those two sections. So, for example, we talk about engagement and how that kind of two-way conversation with employees is used to improve safety management systems. There's a bit of overlap that you'll probably find there with communication, which comes in a later section, but it's obviously a slightly different theme because that's more directed in one direction. So think about things like that as you look through and consider, make sure you're presenting the right information in the right place as well. And next one, please. So taking the time to stop, collaborate with your team and listen. It's, you know, this isn't just a 90s song reference. It's something that's very valid and helpful for us to do now. Someone helpfully pointed out to me the Cornell Notes method the other day as a really useful tool for bringing together your thoughts and your reflections, whether that's kind of brainstorming as a team or kind of taking notes on a variety of things. It's one I'd encourage you to consider looking up. But we really want you to embrace sharing and reflection as part of the process of putting your award together. It's very much, you know, a collective thing for you to get involved with. I appreciate some of you may come from smaller safety teams where it may fall more to 1 or 2 people, but wherever possible, really try and harness the knowledge and the thoughts of your wider team. You could give different sections of the submission to different members of the team to prepare, for example, but also individuals on your team will come up with different experiences, different examples, and they may articulate them in different ways. So make sure you're kind of seeking that wider perspective, and also then, you know, take an external perspective possibly as well from someone not on your direct safety team to just see how that information reads and how it makes sense to somebody who is maybe outside of your usual working everyday knowledge of those procedures. Next one, please. So I think, you know, continuing this idea of reflection and sharing, we want you to kind of treat the award entry process not as just an entry form, not as just a routine thing, but we want you to use it as a way to really help celebrate, you know, your past achievements and to inspire going forward as well. So continuous improvement is a theme that's come through in a couple of the presentations today, and it's really kind of valid, particularly in the industry sector award category, where it's one of those things that makes you look distinctively different from your other competing organisations within your sector. But also, when you come to your entry each year, if you are a repeat entrant, it's a really good touch point to think, how much of last year's entry would I be able to look at this year and still treat as current practice? And if there's too much of that, you know, that's a good catalyst for you to be thinking, okay, which sections could I be moving forward with? Which sections can I be pushing on and doing more with, to seeing how we can really improve things. So yeah, you're trying to strike a balance between, you know, celebrating what's past, but also kind of talking a bit about your future plans as well. Next one, please, Kate. So evidence is really crucial throughout your submission. We talk about this kind of time and time again. So we want you to have a clear narrative, one that kind of makes sense, like was being alluded to by Alison and Claire in the questions earlier. We want you to be able to then back up that narrative with really clear evidence that demonstrates that you can walk the walk as well as talk the talk, so to speak. So for all the points that you're making, we look for you to be able to substantiate them through policy examples, through planning examples, and also real world delivery examples. So things that show action within the correct time frame, which will be 2023 for the 2024 award. And also make sure that you don't leave marks on the table, so to speak. You can use up to 8 pieces of evidence to substantiate each of the different main questions. So there are 10 main questions in the Achievement Award and the Industry Sector Award, for example. We find those who score strongest will be making full use of that allowance as they go through. So really use that evidence allowance to bolster your examples and to make sure that there aren't big chunks of text where you're claiming various things but don't have anything to show for it. So it's the combination of the text and the evidence in tandem which will access the higher level of marks for you as an entrant. Next one, please. So seeking inspiration from the wider awards network, these sessions that we hold within the Awards Excellence Forum have really grown in popularity in recent years. We occasionally do in-person sessions as well. We also have an archive of previous sessions, which is available to members, RoSPA members, via the My RoSPA platform. So it's a really good opportunity for you to look at some of those past case studies. And we're talking about not just support here for putting together a RoSPA award entry, but also for giving you ideas and inspiring you in your wider health and safety management, which of course will then in turn feedback into things and content that you can use in future submissions. The awards ambassador network is also something which is very closely tied in with the Awards Excellence Forum as well. And that's through that network that we are able to deliver kind of a mentoring initiative, which is available to RoSPA members as well, where we can link you up with an awards ambassador who can give you some advice in terms of your process on pulling your ideas together based on their experience of the wider health and safety industry and also their experience as award entrants as well. Next one, please. So I think in terms of where you can use this advice in terms of how to approach your entry, first of all, we've got the Achievement Awards, which are our most popular category of entry, where you are assessed in isolation within your single entry against the 10 questions, your accident performance, and also your enforcement history as well. So there's also the Industry Sector Awards on the next slide, which takes that same approach, but then also looks more widely at all those who are within your same industry area and gives you the opportunity to compete for a best in class as well. And then lastly, we also have on the next slide the Specialist and Excellence Awards. So these are additional award categories, some of which requiring an additional submission, again, which you can take the same approach to telling your story and evidencing thoroughly. On the next slide, I'll just give you a reminder what some of those additional categories are. So we have a number of categories requiring an extra submission. We have the Inspiring Women in Safety Award, which looks at kind of significant inspirational impact of individuals. We also have the Inspiration Awards as a wider category, which look at the work of teams, individuals and projects as well. Then we have the Health at Work Award, looking at the best coordinated approach to health and well-being in the workplace. So that kind of goes into that theme in a little bit more detail than the main Achievement and Industry Sector Award entries, as does the International Dillman Environmental Award, which drills down on your health, safety and sustainability and environmental management as well in a bit more detail. So you can take the same approach for those different categories with your evidence and your narrative as well. And then on the next one, we also have a number of other awards, some of which are selected from within your main submission, including the Workforce Involvement Trophy, which comes from our industry sector submissions. Again, that's an opportunity for you to focus on why and how you're doing workforce engagement in a particular effective way. That is covered from section 4 within that submission, but again follows the same process to your storytelling and your evidence provision. We also have the Best New Entry Award for the entrant who is in the awards for the first time, or the site who is in the awards for the first time, who makes the best overall job of telling their story. And then we have the Fall Prevention Trophy and the Health and Safety Beyond the Workplace Trophy, which are taken from additional responses this year that sit within the Achievement Award and Industry Sector Award categories. So I think that kind of wraps up in terms of us giving an overview. I'm just going to kind of touch on a few more on the next slide in terms of some of those common pitfalls. We've taken a look at a few of these along the way, but you know, just to reiterate, really look at understanding the questions as you come across them. Make sure you are addressing the question as it's being asked. Learn how to hyperlink as well. There are some technical requirements to the evidence and how you link it to your response. So to make sure that your evidence is seen and assessed correctly, you need to be following that and presenting it to the assessor correctly. Also, there's mandatory information that you'll need to include within your submission. So, for example, in the accident history section where we talk about any RIDDOR reportables you have, any dangerous occurrences and so on, there's a requirement for you to provide a description on what those incidents were and how you approached remedying them and how you approached remedial action. So please make sure that you follow that carefully as well, because that's one of the most common reasons for a delay in us being able to confirm a mark, is if we have to approach for mandatory information that has been missed out. And again, so just to wrap up on some observations from the assessor side as well. So evidence, evidence, evidence. So make sure your evidence comes from the correct time period. So it will be all of 2023 evidence this year. And that also applies if you enter in the second part of the year. So even if you are entering in the June deadline, it still needs to be evidence taken from 2023 and not the start of 2024. Make sure you're providing a good balance of policy and planning, as well as worked evidence, and also evidence that is relative to your scope and your site, as defined within your first section of the submission. Also make sure that if you are referencing things within your text, that you've actually included those attachments. This is another area where that taking time to quality check before you submit comes in. And finally, another common thing we get is that entrants focus really well on the safety side, but sometimes not so much on the kind of the health side. So we would ask you to consider how you're working in health and wellbeing themes as well throughout the submission. So we are looking at health and safety. So I think that kind of just about brings my kind of overview to an end. We've got one more slide here, just as a reminder again about kind of the things you can tap into through the wider awards community. If you're a RoSPA member, we've got that archive of on-demand presentations from previous sessions, and also some additional bespoke category advice on there to help you navigate the categories. And as well as that, we've got the mentoring side of things as well. So, these are all great reasons for you to consider RoSPA membership if you're not already a member. Obviously, there's a wide range of other benefits to being a RoSPA member, but these are some of the ones that would apply directly to participation in the awards process. So that's it from me. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you find that information useful to tap into. And I think we've probably got a moment for any questions anybody's got as well on that now. So thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Matt. I am aware that we are running a few minutes ahead over time now, but I think you're right. I think could you potentially provide an insight for us into the level of scrutiny, particularly in relation to data and things like that are provided by entrants?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have an assessment panel and a judging panel, depending on which award you're going for, who will go through each of your items of supporting documentation very carefully. We conduct also kind of checks of HSE databases and enforcement databases and the like routinely, as well as kind of looking at background kind of research on kind of mentions in the news and the wider media and things like that. So I think it's important that we encourage entrants to be as transparent as possible with us, because again, sometimes we will find that delays can be caused if we come across things in the assessment process that haven't been referenced. And it helps our understanding if entrants are kind of upfront about any issues. I think, like one of our other speakers mentioned, we're looking for kind of warts and all in terms of the information you share with us. But yes, we have a very thorough process, and I think for the industry sector awards, we also then go through additional stages of assessment with the judging panels, and we finish that process in terms of the highest award we give, which is the Sir George Earl Trophy, which we finish with kind of site visits from RoSPA consultants as well.
Perfect, thank you very much. And then one final question from one of the attendees today. So any advice on how to select the evidence that they submit, considering that they can only submit 8 examples? Is there anything in particular that scores higher that they should push to the forefront?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I saw that one pop up. I think the worked evidence typically, if you can prioritize worked evidence examples, so evidence examples of you completing things, delivering things in line with policies and procedures, can actually often show a few different things at the same time. I think one example we would kind of give of this is, say, meeting minutes from a health and safety committee meeting. By sharing those meeting minutes that talk about actions and progression of different issues that you're working through, it can show a lot of different stages, and it particularly demonstrates, the effectiveness of that meeting as a function. in a way very much that just a list of the fact that you have these committee meetings on these dates throughout the year wouldn't tell us the same information. So I think worked evidence, is the one that I would encourage you to prioritise wherever possible within the submission.
Perfect. Excellent tip. Right. Thank you so much, Matt, for sharing those tips and those advice. Really, really helpful. I know that will give our attendees a lot of insight into their entrance for next year. So yeah, thank you very much for that. So yeah, thank you everybody for attending today. You know, it's been a really, really fantastic morning. We've talked about the statistics. We've heard from people who are champions in their sectors, all great stuff, but it is now down to you guys. You know, you have a voice and you can really, really help the health and safety sector to continually improve. You know, anybody that knows me or has spoken to me over the past few years knows how passionate I am about developing individuals, about helping you find that voice and grow and develop in your careers. And as individual practitioners, completing your RoSPA Awards submissions really has got fantastic reflective value. You know, it helps you consider what you've achieved within the organisation over the last year and what improvements for the year. And this is something that you can already be recording, you know, in your IRCPD, for example. So just make sure you're making the most of that opportunity and using the stuff that you've got to hand. You know, the RoSPA Awards are also working towards approval with the CPD verification service, so you can watch this space for updates on that coming soon. Another thing that's worth considering is if there is some best practice that you can share from your organisation at a future awards event or a webinar or something like this, and you know, try your hand at some public speaking for the first time. I promise you it is not as scary as everybody thinks it is. So it's a really, really great way for you to try something new in terms of personal development, really help develop your brand and help the industry by sharing all this great stuff that you know and that you've developed. So yeah, one more time, thank you to all of our speakers today for sharing their expertise. A massive thank you to everybody for listening and attending today. We really, really hope the forum was insightful for you and has inspired you to take on board some of the things that you've learned. And one final reminder, of course, the 2024 RoSPA Awards are now open for submission. So I wish you all the best of luck in your awards journeys. Hope to see you all at some of the ceremonies next year so we can celebrate your well-earned achievements. So yeah, thank you once more and goodbye.